It's just a coffee. It's just $5. It's just one small thing you deserve after the week you've had. That's what you told yourself. And you were right, technically. It was just one small thing. The problem is, it was never actually one. You've heard the phrase 1,000 times. Treat yourself. It sounds harmless, kind even. A little reward for surviving another difficult stretch of life. And on its own, a single treat really is harmless. The danger was never in the treat itself. The danger is in what happens when a treat quietly becomes a habit, and nobody ever tells you where that line gets crossed. Here's a question worth asking honestly. When was the last time treating yourself was actually a special occasion? Not a Tuesday, not a rough morning at work, not a generic feeling of just needing something. An actual occasion. If you're struggling to remember one, you're not alone. For most people, the treat stopped being occasional years ago. It just never got renamed. This is where the real damage begins, and it's almost invisible while it's happening. A $5 coffee, bought once a week, barely registers. It feels like nothing, because on its own, it practically is nothing. But shift that coffee from once a week to once a day, and something changes that most people never bother to calculate. That's no longer $5. That's closer to $35 a week. Over a year, that's well over $1,800, spent on something that existed fully for about 10 minutes.
And coffee is just the easiest example because it's small and socially acceptable. The same pattern hides inside dozens of other purchases that never feel significant in the moment. The extra streaming subscription you forgot you had, the lunch out instead of the lunch you packed, the impulse add to cart during a stressful scroll through your phone late at night. None of these purchases feel like a decision. They feel like a reflex. And reflexes, by definition, happen without being examined. Here's the part that makes this especially difficult to notice. Every single one of these purchases is defensible on its own. Nobody looks at a $5 coffee and thinks, this is financially reckless. And they'd be right if it happened once. The problem was never the size of any individual purchase. The problem is what economists sometimes call the aggregation problem. Small numbers, repeated consistently over time, quietly become large numbers. And your brain is remarkably bad at noticing that transformation while it's happening. Think about it this way. If someone asked you directly, would you spend $1,800 this year on coffee? You'd probably say no immediately. That's a real number attached to a real decision, and it would trigger real hesitation. But nobody ever asks that question directly. Instead, the spending arrives in disguise, one small transaction at a time, each one too small to trigger any hesitation at all.
This is why treating yourself is such a dangerous phrase, even though it sounds so gentle. It frames every single purchase as an isolated event, a standalone reward, disconnected from every other reward that came before it. But your bank account doesn't experience purchases as isolated events. It experiences them as a running total. And that running total doesn't care how small each individual treat felt in the moment. So does this mean you should never treat yourself again? Not exactly. That would be its own kind of mistake, trading one unexamined habit for another. Total restriction rarely works long term, and it often backfires into the exact overspending it was trying to prevent. The goal isn't to eliminate treats. The goal is to make them conscious again. Here's where the real shift happens. Ask yourself one honest question before your next small purchase. Is this actually a treat, or has it quietly become a routine? A treat, by definition, feels special because it's rare. If something happens every single day, it has stopped being special. It's just become your baseline, dressed up in the language of reward.
This distinction matters more than it seems. A genuine treat can actually make your relationship with money healthier. It creates a moment of intentional enjoyment, something to look forward to, something that feels earned. A disguised routine does the opposite. It creates the same brief pleasure, but it also creates a quiet financial leak that runs constantly in the background, whether you're paying attention to it or not. There's a deeper reason this pattern is so hard to break, and it has nothing to do with discipline. Small, frequent rewards hit your brain differently than large, delayed ones. Every time you buy something small and immediately pleasurable, your brain releases a modest hit of dopamine. It's quick, it's reliable, it's available anytime you want it for a relatively small price. Compare that to a long-term financial goal, like saving for a home or an emergency fund. That reward is real, but it's distant, abstract, and slow. Your brain, given the choice between a small reward right now and a large reward far in the future, will very often choose right now. This isn't a character flaw. It's simply how the brain is wired to prioritize immediate certain rewards over distant uncertain ones.
Once you understand that wiring, the daily coffee starts to make a different kind of sense. It's not really about the coffee, it's about a reliable hit of pleasure that's easy to access and hard to resist, especially when it's competing against a savings goal that won't pay off for another 2 years. The coffee wins almost every time, not because you lack willpower, but because your brain is doing exactly what brains are designed to do. So what actually works here? Not guilt. Guilt rarely changes behavior for long, and it often just adds shame on top of an already unexamined habit. What works is making the invisible visible. Take one recurring small purchase, the one that happens most automatically, and calculate its real annual cost, not the daily price, the yearly total. Write it down somewhere you'll actually see it. This single act does something powerful. It moves the purchase out of the reflexive part of your brain and into the deliberate part, the same part that would hesitate before agreeing to spend $1,800 all at once. From there, you get to make an actual decision instead of a repeated reflex. Maybe the answer is that the coffee is worth it. Maybe it genuinely brings enough daily value that $1,800 a year feels like a fair trade. That's a legitimate answer, as long as it's a chosen one. The problem was never spending money on something you love. The problem is spending money on autopilot and calling it a treat so you never have to look at it directly.
There's one more shift worth making here, and it might be the most useful one of all. Try replacing frequent small treats with fewer, larger ones. Instead of a $5 coffee every single day, consider a genuinely excellent coffee once a week, somewhere you actually savor. Instead of a mediocre lunch out 5 times a week, consider one truly great meal out, planned and anticipated, once every 2 weeks. This isn't about spending less enjoyment. It's about concentrating that enjoyment into moments that actually register as special, instead of spreading it so thin across every single day that none of it really lands anymore. This is also quietly how your relationship with money starts to change. Spending stops being something that happens to you in scattered, unnoticed moments throughout the week. It becomes something you actually participate in, choosing when a reward is worth it and when it's just habit wearing a reward's clothing. It's just a coffee. It's just $5. Except now you know the real math behind that sentence, and the choice finally gets to be yours.